Welcome to the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast. I'm Kevin Sinise.
And I'm Tim Van Orden, and this is episode 17, Into the Mirror. We'll be starting off with some Star Trek news and then discussing Discovery Season 3, Episode 9, Terra Firma, Part 1.
And then we'll get into our audience question right after our main topic, which is Into the Mirror, where we'll talk about the mirror universe in Star Trek history, what it means about morality and natural law and God's sovereignty and all that good stuff. Please join us. Oh, it's a beautiful night, Tim.
It's cold.
It is cold.
At least for Texas, it's cold.
It is. Well, yeah, I'll give you that. Although I have friends from like the north and stuff, and they were like, you know, the temperatures may be higher here, but the cold is different because there's so much like humidity here. It makes the cold worse. So
here in Texas?
Here, yeah. People from Ohio are like, you know, it's cold up there, but like it gets colder. Like you feel it colder higher up in the numbers than you do up there because it's wetter down here. That's what they tell me.
Okay.
I'm just saying.
That doesn't sound very believable, but whatever.
I trust the sources I cite.
Yeah. Well. All right.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. We've established that. So
I'm sure our listeners were happy to hear that.
I'm sure our listeners were very happy to hear that. Yes, of course. They're always happy to hear what's going on in our world.
Aren't they?
That's why they listen. Yeah. They are.
All three of them.
All three of them. So, Tim, we have a special Star Trek news segment today.
We do?
We do.
What's so special about today's Star Trek news segment?
What is special about it is that this is, we're recording this on December 14th, 10 days away.
Wow, that is pretty special.
10 days away from Christmas Eve, okay?
Yep.
And this episode is dropping like, I don't know, a few days away from Christmas Eve, 5 days away from Christmas Eve. So, given that it's impossibly late in the season for anybody to pick these things up, I think it's time for us to do our Christmas gift-giving guide.
Our annual tradition.
Which we have done every year of this podcast's existence.
Right.
I'm particularly proud of that. Our consistency.
As am I. We have not missed it yet.
We haven't missed it. We will if we keep talking. So all right, Tim. Go ahead with yours, or do you want to alternate? Because I've got one and then I've got two. So you want me to do one and then you do another and I do another one?
I don't matter.
All right. So this is one that I would get. This is one that I would get for you.
Oh.
In a second.
Okay.
This is 24th century TNG LCARS Dinnerware.
What?
Seriously. Plates, bowls, platters, cups, everything. You have the whole thing, and like the mug is marked 017 beverage, and they're really cool. You're gonna want to look at the link, folks. It's going to be in the description.
Yeah. I want to look at the link.
Yeah, I mean this is good stuff. It's $120 for a 16-piece set.
Oof.
So just tell Beth.
Why can't we be in the 23rd century or the 24th century where money is no longer a
thing, right? And we can just replicate these. It'd be like
Is
it like a 3D printer? Like you get a code, you get software or whatever, you get something to replicate something. You get the programming to replicate something, and then you can replicate it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess so.
So we're almost there.
We're almost there. We're getting there. All right. So your next one now.
Right. Okay. So mine is over on TrekMovie.com. Of course, it seems we can't go.
Hashtag not spawn.
Right. So apparently there's another art book, another coffee table book out. There's been a slew of them released recently. Mm-hmm. This one is The Art of Star Trek Discovery, which is apropos to our current series of episodes by Paula M. Block. Okay, the font was a little awkward there. Paula M. Block and Terry J. Erdman.
Yeah.
It was a pretty glowing review of it over on TrekMovie.com. It looks pretty good. I definitely add it to my Christmas list if it weren't so late in the Christmas season.
Yeah, they did Star Trek 101, and I think they've done some other books. But yeah, so that would be a great great.
Yeah,
gift.
the pictures look great. They look really good.
The thing I love about Discovery is how richly designed it is.
It is gorgeous.
It's so deeply designed, and everything is just so detailed. It's beautiful. Just a beautiful looking series. So that would be an awesome book. I mean, all the series are beautiful looking in their own way, particularly in the we talked about the Dan Curry book last week.
Right.
And Dan Curry did beautiful work in the Berman era. But yeah.
And apparently the third one that's been released this year, earlier in the year, was Star Trek: The Motion Picture Inside the Art and Visual Effects. Yeah, that one was from September. Written by Jeff Bond and Gene Kozicki.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you, say what you want about the motion picture. It is a beautifully designed film.
It is.
I love that film. It is gorgeous in so many ways. All right, so last on our gift-giving guide here is a book that I am particularly excited about. It is...
Is it The Gospel According to Star Trek by Kevin C.
You know what? There is a book. The Gospel According to Star Trek, The Original Crew by Kevin C. Neese. Available now at all fine booksellers, or you can get a signed copy at kevincneese.com or gospelaccordingtostartrek.com. Buy now.
And let me tell you, folks, that signed copy, I have a signed copy, and just knowing that while you're reading it makes it so much more enjoyable to read.
It does.
Everything comes through with profundity.
It makes the words leap off the page, in my sonorous tones in ways that you would never otherwise get in an unsigned copy. People don't realize the technicalities of signed books, but it really enhances the reading experience.
It does.
So this book... and thanks for the plug, by the way. I appreciate.
Yeah.
I'm usually right there with the shameless plugs, but when I'm not, you're there to catch me, and I appreciate that.
That's what I'm here for.
This book is Mr. Spock's Little Book of Mindfulness: How to Survive in an Illogical World by Glenn Dakin. By Glenn Dakin. And I'm excited about this. I think it's really cool. There are little little cartoons, little drawings, and little sayings, little quotations for each one, and it's very cool. It's a little cartoon book of little mindfulness thoughts, and it's exciting. It's really cool. It's really adorable. I love it. I have to get it, especially because Spock looks like a monk on the cover, and I always love monastic Spock. Yeah, it makes me really happy.
That does sound like a treat.
Yeah. And those of you who've seen the few things that I ever tweet out, I did tweet a picture of my my Saint Spock T-shirt, which is one of my prized possessions. So yeah, it's really cool. So there you go. That's all the good stuff for Christmas this year.
Yep, rock on. We have so there you go for the Trekkie or Trekker in your life.
Yes, since you have absolutely no time to get it by Christmas, you're welcome.
Right. Yes. Well, this time of year, though, you can just blame it on all the troubles that the Postal Service is having and the COVID vaccine and all that jazz.
You can just be like, hey, the mail is slow. What can I say? And I mean, people are going to be
Here's
having
a picture
Christmas.
Of what I bought you.
Right. People are going to be having Christmas for the next month, I think, probably.
Yeah.
So, hey, it's all good. It's cool. You're just extending the season. It's like when I forget somebody's birthday. I'll just say, happy birthday, extended edition. So
that sounds better than belated.
It does, doesn't it? I like that. I think that's pretty. I should trademark that or something.
Although the next time you tell me happy birthday extended edition, I'll know it's just because you forgot.
It could be that, or it could be because I'm nice and I want you to have a longer birthday season. Or whatever. So anyway, speaking of Discovery, which we weren't.
We've got our segues down to a science.
I tell you, this is the best segue we've done yet.
Isn't it, though?
It's beautiful. I love it.
It's like walking through a door in the middle of a field.
It is. Or a snowy field. Yes.
Trickles down upon us.
Yes.
Rests on our gentle lashes.
Oh, boy. So how'd you like Terra Firma Part 1?
It's good.
All right. Good. I'm glad you thought it was good.
You seemed a little distraught last time when I actually had something to say. So I decided I'd go back to my usual one-word review.
It wasn't that you had something to say; it's that you were like, "Well, let me tell you." Rah, 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 rah. No, it was good. I mean, it was great that you had thoughts about the episode. It was fantastic. I love it when you have thoughts about the episode. It was just they were a little more critical than I anticipated, but that's okay. That's
What,
cool.
am I not allowed to not like some stuff?
I just said that's okay. Did I not? I just said
I didn't hear
okay.
that. I was too busy
okay.
with my righteous indignation.
Well, I know that could be distracting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Terra Firma Part 1. I really enjoyed this episode. I loved it. I was one of those. It's a two-parter that, even though it doesn't end on exactly a cliffhanger, right? It's not like Mr. Worf fire,
Yeah.
It's not that, but it is like, oh gosh, what happens next? Really wanted to see the second half right after I got done with it. I was just like, it can't end there. So
How did it end again?
well, it ended with Philippa was about to Philippa was supposedly about to kill Michael. Or she would have killed Michael,
and then took her off to the agonizer, right?
Yeah, but she was like, all right, I'm not going to kill you. Let's see how this ends. Let's do this differently.
Right.
So it's really interesting to see her sort of reliving, maybe her greatest regret, maybe the part of her life that she would change if she could. I don't know. Clearly she is changing it. And it raises the question as to whether she's actually in the mirror universe, or if this is some kind of, It's a Wonderful Life scenario.
Right.
Like It's a Wonderful Mirror Universe scenario. Or hello?
Hello.
Oh, or what?
Oh, I was going to say the same thing.
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. No, I'm used to you stealing my thunder now. It's no
I
big
do
deal.
it. What can I say? I didn't do it intentionally.
No, I'm giving you a hard time.
I know. I'm used to that too.
Do you though?
Yeah, I do. But yeah, I it's very interesting to see, and this is something that Michelle Paradise talked about as being sort of a reason to do the episode this way. I know I had people contact me like, Mirror Universe, why do we have to go to the Mirror Universe again? And I was like, well, that's where Philip is from, and she has changed in her time in what we know as the Prime Universe.
Which to her is the mirror universe.
Yes, as she rightfully pointed out this episode, which I liked. Which again has so much to do with like perspective, right? And that's what the mirror universe has to do with is a lot is perspective and moral perspective, and cultural perspective. But the upshot is the reason to take her back there is that we can show both the audience and Philippa herself the ways in which she's changed by putting her back in her previous context.
Right.
Which is not unlike what we talked about last week. We talked last week about sort of returning to roots, going back home, and finding sometimes that you learn more about yourself and how you've changed, right? And reconcile with how you've changed,
right?
By going back to a place where maybe you don't fit anymore. And that seems to be the process that's starting with Philippa here. That seems to be what's going on with her. So I'm really curious to see how this is going to go, because the diagnosis from David Cronenberg is that her molecules, now that she has traveled both time and in dimensions, she's interdimensional and across time, that her molecules want to go back either to the previous time or to the previous dimension. That sounds like she has a choice ahead of her.
Oh, that's how they're going to get her back into Section 31.
I think you're probably right. Yep.
Okay.
But I don't know how. I don't know of a way. I mean, especially they'd have to violate the temporal prime directive again.
Or
right?
the temporal laws or
Temporal,
whatever they are.
Yeah, it's a temporal prime directive.
No, the temporal prime directive is that you can't change anything.
Oh, right. You're right. It's the temporal accords.
Yes, temporal accords. That's what word I was looking for.
Yeah, they'd have to violate the temporal accords again, right?
Right. This time intentionally.
Right, and I don't know how.
But I mean, like Philippa's not going to have a problem doing that.
No, she wouldn't. And maybe Michael will go with her on another unsanctioned mission.
Right.
But, it's not like they have time machines just sitting around, especially in the 32nd century.
Well, but the technology is there, though, because this is post-temporal war, so it's got to be somewhere.
Yeah, you'd have to find some pirated thing. But the other thing was, like, the whole thesis, right, of this season is that their jump into the 32nd century is a one-way trip. There's no going back.
Right.
So if we can send Philippa back, well, gee, does anybody else want to go back? I don't know how this is
maybe she gets there via where she is right now. Like, she's in the mirror universe.
Yeah.
And then events unfold in her mirror universe where the Discovery pops over with Lorca. Mm-hmm. And she hitches a ride back with them that time and gets, she revisits her, like she basically starts over again, but this time knowing what she knows and
saying and not going with them,
right.
Finding a way off the Discovery before everybody jumps to the 32nd century.
Yeah,
that's possible. That's
pretty convoluted, and I don't know how they would do that in like one episode.
Right.
And not feel rushed.
Right. But okay, tell me the name of Buller Derby guy again.
Oh, Carl.
Carl, right. Why can't I remember this?
I don't know.
Think of Carl Reiner, I guess. I can remember it. So the thing that Carl says, the fan theory about Carl, which is what I thought, like when I saw him, there was a little photo manipulation that somebody had done where they had Carl sitting there, from the scene in Discovery, and instead of the door next to him was the portal of the Guardian of Forever.
Right, yeah, that gateway thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, is Carl the Guardian of Forever? And if he is, can he get Philippa back to the 23rd century?
What if she doesn't go back to the 23rd century? What if she goes back to just before the burn? Because like the whole point, the meta point to sending them to the 32nd century was so that they didn't have to worry about messing with pre-canon and everything, So they might, what if they send her back to, well, no, because what's his name? Ash is supposed to be involved in the Section 31 show too, I think.
Okay, yeah. Well, and also that still wouldn't send her back to her time. Like, that's the thing. She's either got to go back to the right time or to the right dimension.
Right.
So we shall see. Because I think we're seeing that she doesn't fit in the Terran Empire anymore. Mm-hmm. At least the way it is. Or could she be doing a Spock, and start to change the Terran Empire again?
Right.
We don't know. So that's all very puzzling and interesting, and we'll have to see where it goes.
Stay tuned to find out.
Stay tuned. But I'm interested in what's going on with her, because this is an episode this season where she's not just kind of there, and griping at everybody.
Yeah.
And we have hints that something's going on with her. We're actually getting into what's going on with her, and we're doing some real character development with her. People get impatient, I find.
Yeah, they
that character development isn't happening with particular characters until XYZ episode. And I'm like, we have 13 like main crew, well, if you count Philippa, like 13 main crew characters. Because Gray isn't really a main crew character yet. But we have, like, with Philippa, we have like 13 characters. we can't develop all 13 of them every episode. Like, we got to take it a bit at a time. So just wait. We'll get there. We only have 13 episodes. Maybe we could develop one character per episode. But it's interesting. It's good to see some character development with her and her going through this thing and beginning to have to admit that there's a problem, beginning to have to admit that she needs help, and also that her problem, has to do with needing to find herself and needing to find her place. It's something everybody else is able to do in one way or another because they're grounded in each other. And she's not. Like, she's the outsider, and she hasn't really ever had a way to connect, except through Michael. But even at that, it's not her Michael, right?
Right.
And there's a weirdness to that relationship. And I don't know, it's just interesting seeing her trying to find some groundedness for herself and struggling with literally not fitting. We talked about fitting in and belonging for a couple of episodes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Beth. We talked about that, and I think that's going on again here too. Except this time it's a physiological thing that's going on, and it's a molecular thing that's going on, which is really interesting. I mean, the idea of destiny is one thing, but the idea that our very being, our very physical molecules, right, want to be in the right place or in the right time. I find that fascinating. I mean, obviously it's a science fiction concept. It's not
Sure.
actual science necessarily. We don't know that it's not actually true because we can't travel interdimensionally or through time. But I don't know. It says something about our connectedness to time and place. And yeah, so she's on an interesting journey. I'll be interested to see where it goes.
Yeah, me too. I'll be the first to admit I'm not usually all that excited whenever Star Trek dips into the mirror universe. I think DS9 kind of overdid it, and it got almost to be a parody of itself, I think. But so far, I'll have to give credit where credit is due. Discovery has done well with the mirror universe.
I think they've done really well with it. I agree that there's been a lot more of it than I would have ever expected or wanted. Deep Space Nine and Enterprise both delving into it. But it's been interesting. I will say that. The Deep Space Nine voyage through the mirror universe, it gave us a progress. It gave us development for those characters in the mirror universe. They weren't just caricatures anymore, and I like that. And I really like that there's something going on in the mirror universe with all of our characters, that we have them all there, and that I think we're exploring it in a credible fashion, in a credible way, and I agree. I'm not the biggest mirror universe fan. I will say though, this cast, when we go to the mirror universe and we see these folks in the mirror universe, with the exception of maybe Owo, it's not a one of them belongs there. You can tell that all of these are genuinely nice people who are trying to be villainous but just don't have it in them. Like Tilly's the poster child for it. She shows up and she has that adorable voice of hers and she can't hide it. It just is what it is. Mary just has that voice and she can't be threatening. She just can't. But it's kind of, it's like, oh, you're all so sweet. What are you doing in the mirror universe? You're not like Gabrielle Lorca, for goodness sakes. Whereas Michelle Yeoh, I think, can play both sides of it really well.
Yeah.
And so can Sonequa. That's the one person. Oh my goodness, Sonequa in this episode. She was just she was gone.
She was a little over the top, I think.
The mirror universe is over the top. That's the point. It's supposed to be over the top. I think she was fantastic.
Okay.
That was great.
That's fair. I've learned not to express a
Oh, for goodness sakes.
dissenting opinion.
If you didn't like it, just say so. It's okay.
It's not that I didn't like it. I just wasn't blown away by it,
Okay. All right.
as
well,
you
that's
appear
cool.
to be.
I loved it. I enjoy watching Sonequa relish the fun stuff as an actor. I enjoy watching that. I thought she did really well. I thought she captured the spirit of the Mirror Universe very well, which is
Okay.
admittedly an over the top spirit.
That's fair.
Yeah. So we agree. It's just I like it, and here anyway. Yeah.
We can agree that she was very good at being over the top.
Yes, agreed. What did you think of Carl? How'd you like that sequence?
I loved Carl.
I'm so glad.
He was just matter of fact, and
Yes.
this is what I'm going to tell you, and if you want to be snotty about it, then hey, it's your life. You can blow
Yeah.
it if you want to.
Yeah. Well, and I just loved the whole concept. I love the whole thing that we beam down to this random planet. It's icy, it's snowy, and there's this dude with a little table and a cigar and a newspaper and a bowler hat next to a door. That's awesome. It just felt kind of like almost original series
Yes,
to me.
I was just going to say, it felt very TOS.
Yes, and I love that. I love things that are like anachronistic and out of place and kooky and weird and just why is this here? I love that. It's fun to see that done in this era. That excites me. It's one of many things in Discovery that calls back to original series. That makes me really happy. So, I enjoyed that. I thought it was a great science fiction moment, a really iconic thing. Carl's just an instantly iconic image.
Well, so what else happened? Was there? It felt like not a lot happened on Discovery.
Yeah, I mean, it was all involved with the Mirror Universe, and it was all involved with just that sort of Shakespearean thing playing out of the play that is showing Philippa's life to this point, and the attempt on her life, and then killing Stamets, and then confronting Michael, and all that stuff, and just sort of showing the Mirror Universe, and how Philippa treats Saru, since he's in this universe now a slave and is going to be sent off to be made soup, and she saves him from that, which is all about her character, and it's all about her journey. Well, and it's the same thing with one of the few scenes before we go to the Mirror Universe, in the workout room or whatever it is, the combat room with Philippa and Michael, where Philippa's trying to get Michael to kill her.
Right.
That it was really a Philippa Georgiou focused episode. And I found it interesting that as she was deteriorating, she couldn't grasp the glass on the table. And Sylvia sits down and tries to talk to her about how she's feeling or whatever, and she's like, "I'm fine," and then flips the bowl onto Tilly, and it's like, I was like, man, she's getting meaner and meaner. And again, it's like we talked about last week, where all that defensiveness and that bluster, it's just her trying to escape her own vulnerability. And how much more vulnerable is she now? I mean, she's vulnerable at the molecular level at this point, but even though she did that, I think Tilly kind of sees through that. And to the degree that when they're leaving and she doesn't know if she's going to see her again, she just gives her a hug. She's like, "Thank you. You taught me stuff," And I love that. I love that attitude of showing kindness and showing love, even to people who aren't kind and loving toward you. what how would we term that in a succinct, pithy fashion?
Neighborly
Loving,
love.
yeah, or loving your enemies. Maybe that sounds
Yeah,
catchy.
That's not bad.
It's not bad. I thought that was a good example of it. I really do. It's a small moment, but I think it's a good example of that. I thought that was really cool. Because it's hard to come back from that, until he's really sensitive, and she has her feelings hurt pretty, not that she, can't be tough, but she's, she feels things, and
Right.
she lets you know, and
She wears her heart on her sleeve.
she does, and that's not a bad thing. It's a bad thing when she's trying to be menacing, but but other than that, so I appreciated that. I appreciated. Was this the episode where? I think it was this episode where Adira was trying to get the algorithms right.
Right. And Stamets was like, "Did you turn it back on again?"
Yeah. Have you ever seen the show The IT Crowd?
Oh, I love the IT Crowd.
Hello, IT. Have you tried turning it off and turn it back on again?
Yep.
I love that. Yeah, and it's great that was the thing. It's like that moment in the first Kelvin timeline picture. I hate having to call it that. When the Enterprise isn't moving, and Pike is like, "Did you leave the parking brake on?" and Sulu's like, "No," and then Spock says, "Did you disengage the inertial dampener?" And he's like, "Ah, darn." So like he really did leave the parking brake on. I think that was. I love moments like that. And so this was one of those moments where it's like, "Hey, genius, restart the computer."
Right. Speaking of Kelvin timeline, we got a reference. I'm trying to think what it was now, but we got a reference in this episode.
Oh, we did?
Yeah, because like Beth and I looked at each other and we were like, "They're talking about Kelvin timeline."
Really?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I can't remember. Oh yes, it was they were discussing a unique visitor from another time and universe.
Okay.
They're talking about that the Betelgeusian guy, the time soldier.
Uh-huh.
He was from another time and another universe that splintered off because of a Romulan mining ship that went missing.
Oh man, I totally missed that. That was in the David Cronenberg scene.
Yes.
Oh wow, dude.
Let's see.
That's awesome. And the thing is, they know about that, because the temporal. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so exciting. I'm glad you caught that, because I was really caught up in the prosthetics. Because he looks very similar to the character Jim Cromwell played in Discovery. I mean, in Deep Space Nine. And I was trying to remember the species and all that, and wondering if it was the same species. But yeah, wow. That is so cool.
That was a nice little nod.
That's awesome. I wonder if that character is actually in... No, he's not, because he's wearing like a TNG uniform.
Yeah.
But that's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. Good catch. Good catch. Man. That's the thing. Discovery is like the number one series. Well, I don't know. Next to maybe Lower Decks. But the number one series probably for referencing other series. And in very nerdy ways. Like Lower Decks does it, but it's always a joke. It's usually a joke.
Yeah.
Well,
no, they've still got there's a lot of background Easter eggs.
Yeah, that's true.
That if you're a fan, you can spot from time to time.
That's true.
Like with the animated series drawing of
Kirk and Spock.
Kirk and Spock,
Yep. That's really cool. Yep. But but Discovery is really very, very much, and I love that about it, that it's becoming kind of a hub series, if you will. It's really connecting the universe all
It's
together.
a hub for discovering the greater Star Trek universe.
Yeah.
How
It's a
about
discovery hub.
that? Uh-huh.
Sure. So, folks at home, you may have noticed that we haven't talked a lot about deeper meaning in this episode. We've mostly been nerding, and that's because it's really difficult to talk about the things that are in this episode that give us a little deeper meaning, or the conundrums that. Anyway, that's because it's really difficult to talk about this episode in those terms without getting into really our main topic, which has to do with the mirror universe mindset, the mirror universe worldview and ethics, and how it affects our characters, and whether or not that's realistic, whether or not we think that's something that would happen. So, let's just start at the beginning. I mean, is this a fundamental problem with the mirror universe that is it possible that, I mean, what's flipped about the mirror universe, and is it realistic to think that in a multiverse scenario such a thing could exist?
I struggle with it being so similar, because I feel like when everybody is like the polar opposite, the circumstances under which they meet and have children and continue that direct parallel seems to me to be a bit of a stretch.
And everybody has the same name, and they have the same job on the same ship, and all that sort of stuff. For the most part. Deep Space Nine really plays around with that a lot. In terms of who's in what position. Reese and Worf and Garrick and all that. They're really in different places. But some things are the same. We still have Captain Sisko. He's still married to Jenny, who is alive, not dead. We can change things like that. But it's I say Jennifer. I should say Jennifer. But Jennifer always makes me think of Marty McFly, so I just, but yeah, there is kind of that play, but yeah, it always has kind of bothered me a little bit. And can we just say that maybe that's just a conceit of the kind of story we're telling, because we're exploring something different?
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So the only other problem that I have that kind of takes away some of the realism or the
believability,
the believability of the story is how being so the polar opposite of everybody is like hypersexualized.
True.
And I'm thinking, of course, Kira in her BDSM leather.
Yes.
All over the place, creaking worse than a Klingon.
Yes.
And the uniforms that we see in Enterprise, with the midriff exposed on the women and that sort of stuff. So that feels like an unnecessary, like it doesn't necessarily track that polar opposite is hypersexualized. Because there's nothing about the Star Trek universe that feels unsexualized. They don't seem to be repressed or prudish in any way about anything. So to flip that and go hyper, it takes away some of the believability for me. It takes away from whatever story they're trying to tell with that.
I can understand that perspective. I would counter, though, that the Terran Empire and the mirror universe, as we know it, not the universe itself, but the Terran Empire, we really need to narrow the field that we're discussing, is built around power. And power is all that matters in that worldview and in that ethic. And, sex is power. It is a thing that people use to exert power over other people. And so I don't find it implausible that would be the case. In a place where power is king, then the things that give the kind of power that they're looking for, which is that brute force domineering power, are going to be more at play. That includes sexuality, that includes lying and manipulating, that includes stealing and cheating, and that includes violence, and all those things we see heightened in the mirror universe. So, to me, while I can understand that from a certain perspective that may seem gratuitous or distracting, it also seems to me to be of a piece with the rest of this empire's ethic. But that's just my perspective. What do I know? I don't know. Does that make sense at all, or yeah?
Maybe, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I just like to counter you all the time anyway.
No, I know
it doesn't matter. But yeah,
I am keep bringing a knife to a gunfight.
Oh boy. Which one of us is doing that, by the way?
Bringing the knife to the gunfight? Me.
Oh, okay. I don't think so.
Okay.
I think you just have a different point of view. Yeah. Besides,
and I'm not saying that it's gratuitous or along that sort of a line. I feel like it's not realistic. Like, I get that sex is power.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I just the concept of mirroring
as though sexuality is evil somehow, right? And we don't want to. It's not as though these people are asexual in our universe,
right? I think the point I'm trying to and that's what I'm trying to make is that they're not nuns in the Prime universe, right? They're not these chaste people, and then when you mirror that, for some reason they're hypersexual,
right? But I think also the mirroring, though, and I think that's the question. That's what I'm getting at with this segment. Really, is like, what is actually mirrored in the mirror universe? Mm-hmm. Is it just that stuff is backwards and upside down and on its head, or is it that there is a core sensibility? In the Ready Room this week, Will was talking about how he could see these moments among the characters, these looks that they gave each other and what have you, where in a normal series, like in our normal Prime universe, you would see our characters generally trying to be good and do the right thing, and then occasionally having these sort of negative impulses that they have to tamp down. But that in the mirror universe, they're always trying for doing the wrong thing, basically. And when they have these positive motivations, they have to tamp those down. And I feel like in that moment, he kind of got at the heart of why the mirror universe is different. And I think it's because of the prevailing ethic or the prevailing understanding of morality, which is essentially the ethic of power, exerting power and using any means necessary to gain power. Like, that's all that matters. It's a really, I mean, perhaps you could say it's Nietzschean, but it really distills everything down to, you're constantly in contest with everyone else for being in control, and any excuse you can have to get somebody else out of your way, especially through killing them, you do. It's a disregard for life in favor of power. And I think that is the mirror. That's the shift. That there's not a group of people who are, it's not a United Federation of Planets that is trying to seek justice and that is trying to seek equality and that is trying to understand one another and band together to spread peace throughout the galaxy. It's a Terran empire that is trying to take over, kill, and enslave to expand power, expand violence, expand, the reign of sort of death in the universe instead of the reign of life, to expand lies instead of to expand truth. And that to me really it's and it comes down to, I mean, I talk about this ethic a lot. I talk about this idea a lot, and I think it's a biblical thing. And I say that just not to say that there aren't scriptures you can quote on it, but that I feel like this is an essence or an idea that you can derive from Scripture, and I hope I'm right in that. And that is that there's kind of essentially two forces at play in the world, or two ways of looking at the world or encountering the world, and that's fear and love. And you can either go from fear and you can be constantly on your guard and constantly suspicious and constantly hesitant and all those sorts of things, or you can always operate in love, which is being giving and generous and all those things, looking out for your neighbor and trying to create peace. Mm-hmm. And we have those two things before us in all of our scenarios. And we've talked before about Georgiou being such a weak character, or choosing such weak actions in her bluster and in her forcefulness to try to protect herself. That's fear.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And then when you lead with vulnerability, though, that's love, because it's trust and it's service of others. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
it's almost as though you've exchanged love for fear as the guiding ethic of, we talk about the universe, but it's not like the whole universe is this way. It's the Terran Empire versus the United Federation of Planets. It's those two things in contrast with one another. And I think it's that core ethic that is mirrored. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's fair.
It's fair, but do you think it's right? Do you have another perspective?
Oh, no, I don't. I'm just thinking it through.
Okay.
I'm just kind of mulling it over in my head, because I'm thinking about, like Vulcans aren't Romulans and Romulans aren't Vulcans in the mirror universe. Klingons are still warlike.
Yeah.
And all that jazz. So
they're warlike, but that's because they in their warlike sensibilities naturally fit more closely with that ethic. But if you look at the way Worf behaves in Deep Space Nine, he may still be warlike, but he's abandoned honor.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, if you buy into the way the Terran Empire operates, is you either buy into that system and play by its rules, or you are a slave to that system and are oppressed by it, or you are destroyed. Those are the three strata.
Right.
And so, the Klingons can adapt. The Kelpians can adapt too. They can be nice, subservient slaves, Mm-hmm. But the others, others who can adapt, they do so. And it's been going on for generations. So it's as ingrained as it is for us to, try to be kind to one another. And it goes to that question, that classic psychological question of nature and nurture, right?
Mm-hmm.
How much of who we are is how we're born, and how much of who we are is how we're inculcated in our environment, in our society. And so I think about that too in relationship with Star Trek Nemesis. Because if you think about the Picard story, which is the weak story in that movie, it's the A story, but it's the weaker of the two stories. The Data story is way better. The Data story is, 100% better than the Picard story. But it's interesting the way they mirror each other, the way they're intertwined with each other. And if the Picard story had been executed better, with a different technological approach and or a different narrative approach and or in a novel instead of a movie, it would have worked a lot better. Mm-hmm. But the Picard story, the thing that shakes Picard, the thing that rattles him, the thing that he keeps, the thing that's driving him, right, to try to save Shinzon, is he's kind of trying to save himself. He's trying to see if there's a modicum of everything he knows himself to be inside Shinzon. Mm-hmm. Because if there's not, then he doesn't know where to locate himself. And he doesn't know if he can feel good about himself. Because he's just like, am I just the product of my upbringing? Is that it? Because he and I are genetically identical, and yet he's completely different from me in every way that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't find something intrinsic in him that can be redeemed, then I wonder if there's anything intrinsic in me that can be redeemed. And so it's very much like a mirror universe self. It's very much a self with a different background and a different history. And there's a very real question about the condition of Shinzon's soul. But I think the upshot of that movie, or the sort of message of that movie, if there is one, or one of the messages, one of the main ideas of it, is that we are more than our DNA. You can create some version of us that is our DNA, but there's more to us than that. And that speaks to that sort of soulishness of humankind,
Mm-hmm.
but it also causes us to question where that comes from and how that develops, and if it really can, if the good really can be killed inside us,
Mm-hmm.
And I find that fascinating.
The only thing that I'm kind of zeroing in on right now,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have anything to say about it, is the whole concept of the natural law written on our hearts.
Tell me about that.
And, well, the whole sense, C.S. Lewis goes into this a lot in Mere Christianity. It's kind of how he starts off the book, where he's talking about where do we get this idea of fairness from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so basically what he's talking about is the quote unquote natural law that is written on men's hearts. And so it makes me wonder what the mirror universe implies towards that, and what does it have to say about, because is anybody in the mirror universe saved?
Mm.
And that might be a fun audience question for you. Did Jesus come to Earth in the mirror universe?
I have no idea.
What was Jesus like in the mirror universe?
No idea. I can't speak to that at all.
Did he look like Willem Dafoe?
No, because that's what the real Jesus looked like.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding.
So he looked like Ewan McGregor.
He could. Ewan McGregor, right? No, Mirror Universe Jesus. Mirror Universe Jesus is Jason Momoa.
Nice. That would explain a lot.
That would explain a lot. He was he didn't get around to being Messiah. He was too busy throwing hatchets.
Right? Drinking beer.
Right. Oh boy. But no, keep going on what you're talking about, because you're asking a good question, or you're bringing up a good idea about natural law. Do you agree with Lewis on that? Do you think that we do have natural law? Do you think it's written on our hearts? Do you think we have that in us?
I think there's something there.
Mm-hmm.
I hate, not hate, but I don't want to lean too far into it, because a lot of people misuse that concept
Mm-hmm.
to try and justify their version of morality.
Mm-hmm.
And use it to justify excluding certain acts or certain people groups and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole, deep down, they know better, because the natural law is written on all men's hearts.
Right.
So I don't want to lean into that, but I do think that there is some sort of natural fairness that we have this concept of
Mm-hmm.
that comes from somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, is that what's missing in the mirror universe?
Mm. Right. Or is it because I'm thinking of this too from a parenting standpoint as well. Because there are some of those things that do seem to be intrinsic, but there are also, there's constant instruction that has to take place. And there's constant guiding and shaping that has to take place.
Right.
Because our instincts aren't perfect by any stretch. I mean, that's the whole concept of the fall, right?
Right.
I don't know, maybe the mirror universe fell harder. But it does ask a question. I mean, it does, like, okay, so one of the things that we talk about a lot on the podcast is us being post-evangelical, right? Like that a lot of us are sort of having trouble fitting in the church world as we know it and all that sort of thing. Or in at least American evangelicalism, that sort of thing. And there are sort of fundamental philosophical and cultural reasons that Christianity as we know it is what it is. And they're rooted, they go back to maybe Greek ideas, Hellenistic ideas, right? Or they might go back to modernism, they might go back to the Renaissance, they might go back to rationalism, and various things, particularly in the modern mindset, that have shaped Christianity as a religious structure, if you will, loosely, right, into what it is now. And there are a lot of us who are seeing the cracks in that, especially after the postmodern shift has started to tell us that, you know, there's more to life, there's more to reality than modernism tells us. We started to see that, well, you know, there's actually probably a more Christian way of being, a more Christ-like way of being Christians. And that a lot of the things that we think of as, air quotes, Christian are really just the attempt of recent generations, the attempt of recent centuries to make sense out of Jesus. And that they've actually ended up kind of losing some stuff along the way and getting some stuff wrong along the way, like in Return of the Archons. And particularly if you look at like views of atonement, we've talked about that before, views of atonement and how they've shifted and where those shifts come from in the prevailing philosophies and the prevailing ways of thinking of a time. So all that to say that there is the ability for a culture or a subculture or a society to shift so much in its worldview for so long that people can get very far from where they would be otherwise in their sense of what's right and wrong. So that we're at a point where we can excuse certain things because of certain affiliations that we have. We can look past certain things because of certain contexts that we're in. And if we were really honest with ourselves, we've drifted from, from something that, that maybe the greater good. We're maybe not loving our neighbors anymore, in our attempt to do the right thing, or in the attempt to be moral. Does that make sense? Am I speaking too broadly?
I don't think so.
Okay, good.
I'll leave it to you to decide which one of those two questions I just answered.
I appreciate that. Oh, boy. But I like what you're saying about the natural law. So it invites the question, where is God in the mirror universe?
Right.
Right? And, you could ask the same thing. Where is God in the Roman Empire?
Right.
God is there. God is involved. And I feel like particularly if you think of God as sovereign over not just our dimension, but all dimensions, if we really do have a multiverse, then God to be God must be sovereign over all dimensions in the multiverse, over all our layered universes. And that means that in all of those permutations of reality, in all of those different we's that there could be, in all of our different places that there could be realities that we could have, God gets what God wants in every one of those scenarios. No matter how it goes, no matter what choices we make, no matter how our timeline skews, no matter where we travel on the spider web, we end up in the middle one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I mean, in the mirror universe, or at least in the Terran Empire, that's the slice of the mirror universe that we get to see, right?
Right.
Why does our universe keep breaking in? Why do our people keep coming in contact with Terran Empire people? It seems like every time we do, we make some kind of an impact. We cause some kind of a change. Sometimes that change, pays off the way we want it to. Sometimes it doesn't. But is that an act of God's sovereignty to use even people from another dimension to help the other dimension along? Does God ultimately get what God wants, no matter how far gone a culture is? And I think that that's true. I think God has to be sovereign, even in a place like the mirror universe.
I think you have to be careful not to think about it too much, though, because it starts to get a little dizzying when you think that, sure, there's a point where Prime Universe interjects in the mirror universe, but then there's also a branch where it doesn't.
Right.
And then, so does that branch get intruded upon and create a branch that doesn't and ad infinitum?
We don't know. And
that's the premise of the multiverse, is that there's infinite diversity and infinite
diversity and infinite combinations. Right.
Yeah.
That's very true.
So, by the very definition, there has to be one version, one timeline where God doesn't get his way?
I don't think so. I think that's the only thing, if multiverse is true, I think the only thing that can't change is the sovereignty of God. I think it's the only thing that can't change. Because I think that's the only thing that can't change within our reality. That there's great liberty in our existence. There really is such a thing, I believe, there really is such a thing as chaos. I believe there really is such a thing as random chance. I believe stuff happens. I believe, as the scriptures say, God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust alike. Or as one of my favorite bands, Stavesacre, puts it, I couldn't tell you why good people suffer. I couldn't tell you why the bad ones run free. God showers blessings on the righteous and the wicked. I only know that covers me. I like that a lot. That's why good people suffer, from their self-titled record. But to plug the band, Stavesacre. But I'll put a link to the song. There you go. I'll put a link to the song in the description there. So I really believe that. I really believe in that blending of the sovereignty of God with the truly free will. That the order of the universe as it exists, as we see it, even going back to Georgiou at a molecular level, that it absorbs chaos into its matrix. That the universe continues as a deeply complex, very well-ordered system, no matter what chaos occurs within it. It absorbs it and recirculates and recalculates and keeps going on as a system. And I think the same thing is true of the will of God. I think the will of God is at least as complex as the universe is, and at least as all-encompassing as the universe is. And so therefore, when chaotic things, or what we perceive to be chaotic things, happen in our lives, I think God's will accounts for that and absorbs that into its matrix. And I go back again to the first Kelvin timeline picture. I think that's a beautiful example of that, a beautiful narrative way of telling that kind of story, that interplay between free will and determinism. That it's either that every second of history unfolds exactly as it's supposed to unfold because God has preordained it, and we're all just mechanically living out a pageant, or that we really do have free will, that chaos really exists and really happens, and yet God's purposes are fulfilled anyway, one way or another. Just like in that movie, all our people end up on the right ship, doing the right jobs, in the right place to accomplish the goal that they need to accomplish to save to save humanity or whatever. Right. So it's to say, it's a little picture of that, of I think how that works. So for me, if there are multiple universes, multiple realities, if in fact when we make a decision, and you get that real that sense in your gut that you've changed something, you get that sense in your gut that there's no going back after this. It's like after you have a car accident, you're like, well, there went my day. Right? It's like 2 seconds just changed my entire day, possibly my entire week, could be my year, depending on how bad the damage is and how much money it costs me and all that sort of thing. Just like that, maybe it is that somehow when things change, we create a new timeline. We create a new dimension of reality. But one way or another, I think God is sovereign. God has to be sovereign to be God. And that is the depth and the complexity of God's sovereignty, the completeness, the fullness of God's wisdom, God's knowledge, and God's understanding, which surpasses all our understanding, because it surpasses even our understanding of this universe, as vast as it is, and we are still learning every single day. I just think that gives us such a broad and profound picture of how securely we are held in the hand of God, as a species, as a history, as a story overall. Whether our individual lives go the way we would like them to or not, whether people die tragically or not, it's still overall, I think the whole of creation is rescued. No matter what dimension you're in.
Kind of makes me wonder if maybe Armageddon is actually when all of the timelines merge back together.
Oh, that's fascinating. Well, and we could get into eschatology and all that stuff.
But speaking of timelines,
we have one for this episode.
Our line of time is up,
and we have a whole other episode in the Mirror Universe coming next week.
Right, so we can continue this discussion,
and we'll see what happens in our discovery story, and what other stories in Star Trek that reminds us of. And we'll go. Do you think
they celebrate Christmas in the Mirror Universe?
Maybe they wait for the arrival of Krampus. I don't know.
Kind of sorry I asked now. And that brings us to our question for this week, which our listener sent in from a Discovery fan group that they are a part of.
Okay.
Would it be fair to say Star Trek and all science fiction set far in the future, quote, take the Christ out of Christmas?
Mm-hmm. In what way do they elaborate on that?
Oh, so yeah, they go on to say like his reign never came, he didn't bring an end to the world, his actions were not needed because humanity solved their own problems, along that sort of a line.
That's a curious thought. So the idea is that if Christ is real, then Christ will return, and if Christ hasn't returned by the 23rd or the 24th or the 32nd century, then the gospel's not true, and this is all bogus.
I mean, when you think about how long the beginning of the universe is to when Jesus arrived, the time between Jesus' death and even the time that Discovery is now in is like minuscule. It's like the blink of an eye.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And at no point does Revelation ever really give you a sense of the time frame.
Right. And
they use terms that we can kind of connect with, but they never say, it's going to be before we get off of Earth,
right. Well, but there is that sense of the soon coming, rule and the soon coming reign of Christ, the soon coming return of Christ in the early followers.
Right. But I think they didn't understand what soon trademark, meant to to God, right? They didn't have this understanding that the earth was actually millions of years old already.
Right. Right. That's a good way to look at it. That's a very true possibility. The other way to look at it would be, because there are different ways to read Revelation, right? There are different ways to look at that. And many people believe that it's a prophetic poem about the time in which it was written, that it's not foretelling a future, but rather a specific future, but rather sort of giving the hope that Christ will restore all things,
Right.
no matter what, and that there's imagery in there that's either about things that are going on at the time, or some people believe that they are future events or future from the time John is writing, but that they've all been fulfilled by now. It's a view called full preterism. And you can look that up and decide what you think about it. I think there are lots of different ways to look at it and lots of different ways to understand it. And I don't like to get settled into just one because it is so poetic. It's very clearly poetic. And I don't like to take something that poetic and try to make it concrete.
Right. I think to try and, just like much of the Bible, to try and make it a literal prediction of events is missing the point.
Right. And, I have a friend who's a poet. And, I love music. I love poetry. I love song lyrics. But, I listen to somebody like, I listen to a lot of U2. And I love Bono as a lyricist. But there are a lot of U2 songs that you can listen to. And you can ultimately not really know what the song's about. Like, you don't really get the point of the song, except that along the way, there are all these images that are so compelling and so beautiful. And they you listen to a song and it sounds like it belongs somewhere. Like it's the story of someone or something, but you don't know what exactly. But that's not the point. The point is that there are these beautiful ideas. And it can bother me, with the background that I have, it can bother me that I don't really know what is being talked about in a song or in a poem. And so I was reading some poems of a friend of mine who's a really fine poet, and I just asked her, like, I don't know what this is about, And I said, this is what I get from it, but I don't really know what it means. And she said, well, you got from it exactly what I wanted you to get. It doesn't matter what it means. What matters is that I gave you the feeling you were supposed to have. Like you got the feeling I was trying to convey. That's all that matters. I don't care. Now, then she wouldn't told me, but, just because, we're friends. Somebody once said, I forgot who said it, but ask a poet what his poem means. And if he despises you enough, he'll tell you. But yeah, I just, the point of that is just to say that I believe the most important thing about that vision that John had is not to correlate it to real events or to decide that it's predicting the future or to decide that it's telling the past, but that it's talking about the fullness of the salvation of Christ, the cosmic nature of the salvation of Christ. And even if you ultimately believe that it's a metaphor and it's really worked out through humanity, and it's maybe a goal that we attain, that we reach toward, and there's no time when Jesus descends from the heavens, but that creation is restored through God-empowered human effort. Even if you go that far with it, to me it doesn't really matter as long as you recognize, like we were saying earlier in the episode, that that God is still sovereign, and that the universal work of Christ, the work of Christ, the salvific work of Christ, is universal, and is complete and is full, and that the Christian experience, the experience of following Jesus, is summed up well in an old saying: "I have been saved, I am being saved, I will be saved." So that there is a salvation that is accomplished, there is a salvation that is in progress, and there is a salvation that we look forward to. And they're all a part of the Christian experience. So to go back more specifically to the question, I'm not looking for Jesus to necessarily bring an end to the world. And I'm not looking for that to happen within a certain time span. And I'm not honestly really concerned about specifically how, air quotes, Christian anything is in, let's say, Star Trek. I mean, to pick a random example. Because it's not about that. The stories we tell, I mean, you can look at The Lord of the Rings, and you don't see a world that has necessarily any connection to the story of Christ. Yet, that story comes from a Christian whose Christian worldview and Christian ethic and Christian spirituality informs the story every step along the way. It's not about whether Jesus shows up in the history of Middle-earth. It's about how the view of Christ that Tolkien had informs the way he crafts that world. And it's the same kind of thing in Star Trek. Yes, Star Trek ostensibly is our future, but, I don't think it's important whether we specifically talk about Jesus or not, or specifically, see any of those things. And like you said, it's not about when this thing happens, if it happens, or how it happens. I don't think we can definitively say, oh, well, this is set so far in the future that Jesus should have come by now, therefore it undoes the gospel. I really don't think we can say that. So, does that work?
Well, very good.
All right.
Thank you very much, listener, for that question.
Yes, thank you.
That was a lot of fun to dive into.
That was interesting because that was actually a non-listener asking a question that a listener found interesting and shared with us. Hey, feel free to do that if you want to. That's great.
And, if you want to share our response, listener, if you want to share our response with them, we would not be opposed to that.
Go ahead. Yeah, love that. So
yeah.
There's a timestamp in the description of the podcast. You can tell them when to start listening.
Nice.
There you go. Okay. So Tim, what do we have going on next week?
Well, next week we are going to be covering the 10th episode of Discovery Season 3, Terra Firma Part 2, and we will see what else comes up.
That sounds like familiar but new all at the same time.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's good.
I'll try and spice it up next time.
You're doing great. I think
be careful what you ask for.
Oh dear. Okay, well, I hope everybody will join us for that. I'm looking forward to the next episode and see what else we can do with the Mirror Universe. In the meantime, please like, share, comment, rate, and subscribe. And please also send us your questions. Gospel According to Star Trek on Twitter and Facebook, or gospeltrekpodcast@gmail.com, because we, as always, would love to discuss your question or someone else's on the show. Tim, do you have anything else to say to the folks at home?
Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
That's the worst Yoda impression I've ever heard.
I wasn't shooting for an accurate, Frank Oz level Yoda impersonation there.
Well, all right.
Because I would never be able to do it justice, or the mic would probably just be destroyed by me going off the levels.
I see. Okay. Well, for this edition of the Gospel According to Star Trek podcast, that's going to wrap it up. For being here, thank you so much. Next time, until...
I'm Tim Van Orden.
And I'm Kevin C. Neese, and as Jesus said in John 10:10, live long and prosper.
See you next time.